Dad left my brother $2.3 million and gave me his worthless ranch. The secret in his barn made my brother turn pale. Look, I'm a high school history teacher from New York. I spend my days explaining the Louisiana Purchase to teenagers who think TikTok is a primary source. My idea of excitement is finding a first edition textbook at a used bookstore. So standing in the middle of West Texas at my father's funeral, sweating through a $300 will suit like a rotisserie chicken, wasn't exactly my comfort zone. 20 years. That's how long it had been since I stood on this godforsaken patch of earth. 20 years since we buried Mom. 20 years since I packed everything I own into a beat-up Honda and drove away from this place like the devil himself was chasing me. The thing about Texas in July is that it doesn't just get hot, it gets biblical. The kind of heat that makes you understand why ancient people invented concepts like purgatory. My suit jacket clung to my back like a guilty conscience. Sweat pooled in places I didn't know could sweat. Around me, people in sensible cotton and wide-brim hats looked perfectly comfortable while I slowly liquefied. I felt like a museum exhibit. City boy returns. Note the impractical footwear. My older brother Clay stood about 20 feet away, shaking hands and accepting condolences like he was running for mayor. He wore his grief the way he wore everything else. Perfectly. Dark suit that actually fit the weather, polished boots, that easy Texas charm that made people trust him instantly. He clapped old family friends on the shoulder, nodded solemnly at the right moments, even managed a small smile when someone shared a memory about Dad. Meanwhile, I stood there like an awkward crane, shifting from foot to foot, trying to remember if I was supposed to know these people. The old guy with a handlebar mustache looked familiar. Maybe he sold Dad cattle feed? The woman in the floral dress kept staring at me like she expected me to remember her prize-winning pie from the county fair circa 1998. I didn't. The pastor said something about ashes and dust. How fitting. That's all this place ever was to me. Dust and disappointment. Dad never understood why I wanted to leave, why I chose books over cattle, teaching over ranching. To him, my master's degree in American history was just expensive paper. My job in New York was me playing pretend while real men did real work. The last time I saw him was 3 years ago at my divorce hearing. He drove all the way to New York, sat in the back of the courtroom, and didn't say a word. Afterward, he took me to a diner, and we sat in silence for 45 minutes while I picked at scrambled eggs I couldn't taste. Finally, he said, "Your mother would have known what to say." Then he paid the check and drove back to Texas. That was it. That was our relationship. Silence and the ghost of a woman who knew how to translate between us. Now here I was, burying him next to her, and I still didn't know what to say. The funeral ended. People migrated toward their trucks and cars, heading to the reception at Clay's place. He owned one of those modern ranch houses that cost more than most people make in a lifetime, all glass and steel, and Texas Monthly Architectural Awards. I'd seen the pictures on Facebook. I hadn't been invited to the housewarming. I loosened my tie and headed for the rental car. That's when Clay caught up with me. He moved fast for a guy in cowboy boots. "Hey, Jake, riding with me to the lawyer's office?" Right, the will reading. I'd almost forgotten. Honestly, I figured there'd be some token gesture, maybe a few $1,000s to split, and then I'd fly back to New York and resume explaining to 16-year-olds why the Electoral College exists. "Sure," I said. His truck was predictably immaculate, one of those massive Ford F-350s that cost as much as a year of my salary. Leather seats. That new car smell mixed with expensive cologne. I climbed in and immediately felt like I was contaminating it with my secondhand bookstore aesthetic. We drove in silence for a while. The landscape rolled past, all brown grass and barbed wire fences. Nothing had changed. Nothing ever changed out here. That was kind of the point, I guess. Stability. Tradition. All the things I ran from. "You holding up okay?" Clay finally asked. The question annoyed me, not because it wasn't genuine, but because it probably was. Clay wasn't cruel. That would have been easier to deal with. He was just better son, better businessman, better at being what Dad wanted. I'm fine, I said. Long flight from New York? 5 hours. Layover in Dallas. He nodded like this was fascinating information. Listen, Jake, I know things were complicated between you and Dad, but he did love you. He just didn't know how to show it. I stared out the window. A dead armadillo baked on the shoulder of the road. There's a metaphor in there somewhere, I thought. I know, I said, even though I didn't. The lawyer's office was in town, which is generous language for a cluster of buildings that included a gas station, a Dollar General, and a place that sold both bait and notary services. The law office occupied the second floor of the oldest building on Main Street, above what used to be a hardware store and was now some kind of antique shop. We climbed the narrow stairs. The air conditioning wheezed like it was on its last legs. The office smelled like old paper, lemon furniture polish, and the accumulated anxiety of 70 years of estate planning. The lawyer, a thin man named Warren Hicks, who looked like he'd been practicing law since the Eisenhower era, gestured us toward 2 chairs facing his desk. Clay sat down like he belonged there. I perched on the edge of my seat, like a kid called to principal's office. Mr. Hicks cleared his throat and adjusted his reading glasses. Gentlemen, thank you for coming. I'll keep this brief and straightforward, as your father requested. He opened a folder and began reading. The language was all legal boilerplate at first. I, Robert James Fletcher, being of sound mind, yeah, get to the part where we find out if there's anything left after medical bills and funeral costs. Then Hicks got to the meat of it. To my eldest son, Clayton Robert Fletcher, I leave all business assets, including Fletcher Construction, LLC, all associated accounts and holdings, stock portfolios, and liquid assets. The current estimated value is approximately $2.3 million. I felt something cold settle in my stomach. Clay didn't even blink. Of course he got the money. He was the one who stayed, the one who built a successful business, the one who had Sunday dinners with Dad every week and knew how he took his coffee. Hicks continued, to my youngest son, Jacob Thomas Fletcher, I leave all my land holdings, specifically the property known as the Lone Star Ranch, including all structures, improvements, and any and all movable and immovable property located thereon. The room went very quiet. I could feel Clay looking at me. The ranch. Dad left me the ranch. The same property Clay had been trying to get Dad to sell for years, because it was barely profitable and the land taxes alone were enough to choke a horse. This wasn't a gift. This was a final statement. Clay gets the money, the success, the proof that he was a good son. I get dirt and memories and the privilege of figuring out what to do with the property I never wanted in the first place. Mr. Hicks, Clay said slowly, can you clarify what movable property means in this context? Hicks looked at his papers. Livestock, equipment, vehicles on the property, content of all structures. Standard language. Clay leaned back in his chair. I could practically hear his brain calculating. The ranch had maybe 30 head of cattle, some old equipment worth pennies on the dollar, and a house that hadn't been updated since Nixon was president. Meanwhile, he got $2.3 million in cash and a thriving business. The math wasn't hard. Are there any outstanding debts on the ranch? I asked, my voice sounding strange to my own ears. Hicks consulted another page. The property is owned free and clear. However, there are ongoing operating expenses and property taxes. Mr. Fletcher was current on all obligations at the time of his death. Translation, it's yours, but it'll bleed you dry if you try to keep it. We signed papers. Hicks explained probate timelines and tax implications. I nodded at appropriate moments while my brain tried to process what just happened. Clay asked intelligent questions about asset transfers and corporate structures. Of course he did. Finally, we were done. Clay shook Hicks's hand with that firm, confident grip that made other men trust him. I mumbled something polite and followed him down the stairs. The heat hit us like a physical force when we stepped outside. The reception was at Clay's house. I walked in and immediately regretted it. The place was packed with people I vaguely recognized from a life I'd left behind. They balanced paper plates loaded with brisket and potato salad. They spoke in those low, respectful tones people use when they're not quite sure if it's okay to laugh yet. I found a corner and tried to blend into the drywall. Clay worked the room like a pro, shaking hands, accepting casseroles, being the strong, stoic son everyone expected. Nobody seemed to notice I existed, which was fine. I was good at being invisible. Then Clay made his way over to me. He had 2 glasses of whiskey. He handed me one. "We need to talk," he said quietly. "Okay." He steered me toward his study, a room with walls lined with books that looked like they'd never been opened and a desk the size of my kitchen table. He closed the door. The noise of the reception became a distant murmur. "Jake, I'm worried about you." I took a sip of the whiskey. It was good. Probably cost more than my monthly student loan payment. "Listen," he continued, "I know Dad left you the ranch, and I know that probably feels significant emotionally, but we need to be practical here." Practical. Right. Clay's favorite word. The property taxes on that land are over $50,000 a year. The operating costs are another 30. The cattle operation barely breaks even. Dad was sentimental about that place. But it's a financial black hole. I said nothing. Just swirled the amber liquid in my glass. "I don't want to see you drown in debt because of Dad's attachment to a piece of dirt. So here's what I'm thinking. Let me take it off your hands. I'll give you $20,000. Cash. I know that's not much, but it's a fair price for the headache. You can take that money, go back to New York, and not have this situation hanging over your head like a guillotine." He said it all so reasonably, like he was doing me a favor, like he was a responsible adult, and I was a child who needed protecting from my own poor judgment. 20,000, less than 1% of what he got, for a property that had been in our family for 3 generations. But that wasn't what made my blood boil. It was the tone, the assumption, the unspoken message that I was too incompetent to handle this on my own, that I needed my big brother to swoop in and save me from myself. Just like always, I thought about all the times Clay had been there to catch me when I fell. Except he wasn't catching me. He was reminding me that I fell, that I needed catching, that he was the strong one, and I was the one who couldn't quite hack it in the real world. I looked at him, really looked at him. He genuinely thought he was being generous. In his mind, this was brotherly love. "I'll think about it," I heard myself say. His face brightened. Good. Take a couple days. Look at the numbers. But don't wait too long, Jake. Property like that, you need to make decisions fast or it makes them for you." I nodded, finished my whiskey, made some excuse about needing air. I walked outside and stood on Clay's perfect patio, overlooking his perfect pool. The sun was setting, painting the sky in shades of orange and purple that were almost beautiful enough to make me forget where I was. 20 years. I spent 20 years building a life away from this place, away from the weight of expectations I could never meet. And here I was, right back where I started, being told I wasn't good enough. Except something felt different this time. Maybe it was the whiskey. Maybe it was exhaustion. Maybe it was the image of my father, sitting alone in that courtroom 3 years ago, too emotionally stunned to comfort his own son, but showing up anyway, because that's what he knew how to do. But I realized something standing there. I needed to see it. The ranch. Before I signed away to Clay and flew back to my cramped apartment and my pile of ungraded essays, I needed to understand why Dad left it to me. There had to be a reason. Dad was many things, but he wasn't random. I found Clay inside, talking to some old rancher about cattle prices. "I'm going to drive out to the ranch." I told him. "Just want to take a look." He frowned slightly. "Tonight? Tomorrow I fly back. This is my only chance." He studied my face for a moment, then nodded. "Keys are probably still above the visor in Dad's truck. It's at the ranch. A friend drove me out there." The sun had fully set by the time we pulled up the property. The house was dark. The barn was a shadow against the starlit sky. My friend dropped me off and headed back to town. I stood in the driveway for a long moment, listening to the crickets and the distant sound of cattle lowing. Dad's old Ford F-150 sat where it had probably sat for the last 20 years, under a corrugated metal carport. I walked over and reached up above the visor. The keys fell into my palm. I climbed into the truck. It smelled like dust and old leather and something else I couldn't quite name, Memory, maybe. The engine turned over on the second try, rumbling to life like it had been waiting for me. I sat there, hands on the steering wheel, staring at the dark outline of the ranch house. 20 years of running. 20 years of convincing myself I was better off anywhere but here. And now, Dad's final act was to drag me back and force me to look at what I'd left behind. I put the truck in gear. Time to see what he left me. Time to see if there was any reason at all to believe I was more to him than just the son who got away. The gate screamed when I pushed it open. 20 years of rust and neglect had fused the hinges into something that sounded like a dying animal. I stood there in the darkness, flashlight in one hand, listening to that metallic shriek echo across the empty land. Welcome home, I guess. The ranch house loomed ahead, a dark silhouette against a darker sky. No lights, no life, just the skeletal remains of a place that used to mean something to someone. The porch steps groaned under my weight, each one a different pitch, like playing a broken xylophone in a horror movie. I found the spare key where it had always been, under the third flower pot from the left. The pot was empty now, just dried soil and a dead spider. The key itself was warm from the day's heat, still radiating that stored sunshine even though the night had turned cold. The front door opened with surprising ease. That's when the smell hit me. Not rot, not decay, just absence. That particular scent of a place where no one has cooked breakfast or tracked in mud or left a jacket on the back of a chair in so long that the house itself has forgotten what people smell like. Museums have that smell. Abandoned churches. Places where time stopped and never bothered to start again. Clay was right. This was a mausoleum. I flicked the light switch. Nothing. Of course. I tried another. Same result. The electricity was probably shut off. I swept my flashlight across the living room and felt something crack in my chest. Nothing had changed. The same couch where I used to read books while Dad watched the evening news. The same coffee table with the burn mark from when Clay accidentally set down a hot pan. The same rug that Mom brought back from a trip to Santa Fe. The one with the geometric patterns that I used to trace with my finger while lying on the floor. On the wall hung a photograph I'd forgotten existed. All four of us, me, Clay, Mom, Dad, were standing in front of this very house, squinting into the sun. Clay's maybe 12, chest puffed out, staring directly at the camera like he's daring it to blink first. I'm 7 or 8, skinny as a fence post, looking at something off to the side of the frame. Probably a lizard. I was obsessed with lizards. Mom's smiling that patient smile she had. Dad's not smiling at all, but his hand rests on my shoulder. I've forgotten about that hand. My mother used to say something to me when I was young and constantly distracted by every bird, every cloud, every odd-shaped rock. She'd ruffle my hair and say, "You always see what other people miss, Jake. Don't ever lose that." I lost it anyway. Traded it for lesson plans and mortgage payments and the kind of tunnel vision you develop when you're just trying to survive in a city that doesn't care if you exist. Standing in that dark house, staring at a photograph of a family that didn't exist anymore, I felt that old skill trying to wake up, like a muscle you haven't used in years, suddenly remembering what it was built for. I moved through the house slowly. Kitchen. Clean dishes in the drainer. The kind of sad, efficient cleanliness of someone who eats alone. Bedroom. Bed made with hospital corners. Dad was military once upon a time. Some habits you take to the grave. Then I found his office. It was really just a converted back bedroom. But Dad had always called it his office with a kind of pride that suggested it was more than just a desk and a filing cabinet. The desk was old oak, scarred and stained, the kind of furniture that survives generations because it's too heavy to throw away. I sat in his chair. It creaked. I opened the top drawer. That's when my temporary nostalgia died screaming. There, on top of a neat stack of papers, was an envelope from the county tax assessor's office. I knew what it was before I opened it. You don't teach high school on a teacher's salary without developing a sixth sense for bad news in official envelopes. $50,000. Property tax. Due in 60 days. The number didn't make sense at first. My brain couldn't process it. $50,000 was more than I made in a year after taxes. It was 2 years of student loan payments. It was the cost of a decent car or a year of graduate school or every financial cushion I didn't have. I sat there, staring at that number in the beam of my flashlight, and felt the walls start closing in. Clay's voice echoed in my head. 20,000. Cash. Fair price for the headache. This wasn't a headache. This was a financial guillotine. My phone buzzed. Of course it did. The universe has a sixth sense of timing. Clay, just checking in, his text said. You make it to the ranch okay? I stared at those words. The casual concern. The big brother routine. I could practically hear his voice, smooth and reasonable, ready to swoop in and save me from my own poor judgment. My thumb hovered over the keyboard. Yeah, I typed back. It's something. 3 dots appeared immediately. He'd been waiting. Listen, Jake, I've been thinking. Maybe I lowballed you. How about 25? I really don't want to see you stressed about this. 25,000. He'd raised his offer by $5,000 without me even asking, which meant one of two things. Either he felt genuinely guilty or he knew something I didn't. I bet on option 2. Thanks, I typed. I'll think about it. Don't think too long. These things have a way of getting complicated. I turned off my phone. The silence that followed felt thick enough to cut. I sat there in Dad's chair, in Dad's office, holding Dad's enormous tax bill, and tried to think like a historian instead of a panicked teacher with a negative bank balance. What was I missing? I started going through the desk drawers systematically. Bills, receipts, owner's manuals for equipment I didn't recognize. A folder labeled insurance with nothing interesting inside. Another labeled medical with everything sad inside. Then I found the ledger. Dad kept a physical ledger, not a spreadsheet, not QuickBooks. An actual bound ledger with columns hand-drawn in pencil and entries written in his cramped, practical handwriting. I ran my fingers over the pages and felt a strange affection for this stubborn refusal to join the 21st century. I started reading. The income side made sense. Cattle sales, hay sales, government subsidies. Nothing impressive. Barely enough to justify keeping the operation running. But the expenses didn't make any sense at all. Electric bill, $1,200 a month. For a ranch this size, running what, a couple lights and a refrigerator? That was insane. I paid less than that for my New York apartment with the world's least efficient heating system, water filtration systems, industrial-grade equipment, thousands of dollars in parts and maintenance. Why would a cattle ranch need industrial water filtration? Feed purchases, specialized aquatic feed, not cattle feed, aquatic. I flipped back through the ledger, checking dates, cross-referencing entries. The pattern became clearer. Every month, like clockwork, Dad was spending a fortune on electricity, water treatment, and some kind of specialized feed that definitely wasn't for cows. I stood up and started searching the office more carefully. There had to be more. Receipts, invoices, something that explained what he was actually doing out here. In a banker's box under the desk, I found them. Farm journals. Not the glossy magazine kind. The real kind. Composition notebooks filled with daily observations, weather notes, the minutiae of agricultural life that most people would find mind-numbingly boring. I opened one at random. July 15th, temperature 96 F. Wind, an E5 miles per hour. Checked irrigation line B. pH at 7.8. Temperature holding at 14 C. pH? Temperature with a C? I'm a history teacher, not a scientist. But I knew enough to recognize those weren't cattle measurements. Cattle don't care about water pH. And 14 degrees Celsius is about 57 Fahrenheit. Way too cold for Texas in July, unless you're talking about something underground or underwater. I kept reading. Page after page of cryptic notes. Adjusted oxygen levels. Replaced filter cartridge. Specimens growing steadily. Check calcium supplements. Specimens? My hand started shaking. Not from fear. From something else. That old feeling of puzzle pieces started to click together. The same rush I used to get when I'd find a primary source that contradicted the accepted historical narrative. I grabbed another journal. Then another. I spread them across the desk and started reading them chronologically, watching Dad's careful documentation evolve over years. Early entries were tentative, experimental, lots of failures noted in terse, frustrated language, pH crashed, lost 3, temperature fluctuation, dead by morning. But later entries showed refinement, success, pride, even in Dad's typically understated way. Solve the oxygen problem. Growth rate exceeding projections. May need larger facility. Larger facility? For what? I stood up and paced a small office, flashlight beam cutting wild patterns across the walls. Think, Jake. What was he doing? Aquatic feed, water filtration, temperature control, pH monitoring, aquaculture. He was raising something in water. But what? Catfish? That was common enough in Texas. But industrial-grade filtration seemed like overkill for catfish. And the electric bills. And the secrecy. I needed more information. I went through the office like a grad student on a deadline, pulling out every drawer, checking every folder. In the bottom drawer of the filing cabinet, my fingers touched something that didn't feel like paper. A Bible. Old leather, cracked and soft with age. Mom's Bible. I recognized it immediately. She used to read from it every Sunday morning while Dad made breakfast. The bookmark ribbon was still in place, marking somewhere in Psalms. I opened it carefully. The pages were brittle and thin, covered in Mom's looping handwriting. Little notes in the margins. Favorite verses underlined. Something fell out. A photograph. I picked it up with trembling hands. It was me, maybe 6 years old, standing by the pond on the east side of the property. I'm holding a fish. A tiny bass, barely bigger than my hand. My smile is huge, gap-toothed, pure childhood joy. And next to me, slightly out of focus, is Dad. He's not looking at the camera. He's looking at me. And on his face, barely visible, is the ghost of a smile. I'd forgotten this day completely. But holding that photograph, it came flooding back. How proud I'd been of that stupid little fish. How Dad had helped me reel it in, his big hands guiding mine. How he'd said, "You got good eyes, son." Saw that fish before I did. I turned the photograph over. On the back, in Dad's shaky handwriting, was a message, recent by the looks of it. The ink was fresh enough that it smudged slightly under my thumb. You always saw what others missed. Remember this day. Look deeper. Genesis 1 verse 21. Genesis 1 verse 21. I grabbed my phone and pulled up a Bible app, found the verse. And God created great creatures of the sea and every living thing with which the water teems, and that moves about in it, according to their kinds. Great creatures of the sea. I stared at those words. Then I looked back at the journals. The aquatic feed, the temperature control, the pH monitoring. My God. I grabbed the most recent journal and flipped to the last entry. 3 days before Dad died. The handwriting was shakier here, but the words were clear. Cattle are just cover. Always have been. Real investment by the pond. Old barn. He'll never understand it. Clay sees dollars, not value. It has to be you, Jake. You see deeper. Don't let him take it. My breath caught. The pond. The old barn by the pond. I'd walked past that barn 1,000 times as a kid. It was always locked. Off limits. Dad said it was just storage for equipment, dangerous chemicals. Not a place for children. I'd stopped thinking about it years ago. But now, great creatures, aquatic feed, industrial filtration, electricity bills that could power a small factory. The pieces weren't just clicking together anymore. They were screaming. I stood up so fast the chair fell backward. I grabbed a heavy mag light from the desk, the kind that doubles as a weapon if you need it to. My heart hammered against my ribs. The walk from the house to the barn took less than 5 minutes, but it felt like miles. The flashlight beam bounced with each step, making shadows dance and stretch across the empty land. The pond was just a dark mirror to my left, perfectly still, reflecting nothing. The barn loomed ahead, bigger than I remembered, darker, the kind of structure that looks like it's been waiting for something. The door was heavy steel, not wood, unusual for a barn. Even more unusual were the industrial padlocks. 3 of them, but the keys were in my pocket. I'd found them in Dad's desk drawer, labeled in his careful handwriting. North Barn. Keep locked. My hands shook as I fitted the first key into the first lock. It opened with a smooth click. Too smooth. These locks had been used recently, maintained carefully. Second lock. Same thing. Third lock. I stood there, hand on the door handle, and realized I was terrified, not of what I might find, of what it might mean. If Dad had left me something valuable, something worth all the secrecy and all these expenses, then everything changed. Clay's dismissal, the tax bill, the assumption that I was getting the worthless part of the estate while he got the real treasure. All of it might be wrong. And if Clay knew or even suspected what was behind this door, that changed everything too. I pulled the door open. The hinges were silent, well-oiled, professional. I stepped inside and stopped breathing. The first thing that hit me wasn't what I saw. It was what I heard. Humming, low and mechanical, like the purr of some massive electrical creature sleeping just below the threshold of consciousness. Not the silence of abandonment I'd expected. This place was alive. I stepped inside, and the door swung shut behind me with a soft pneumatic hiss. Automatic, professional. My flashlight beam swept across the interior, and I forgot how to breathe. This wasn't a barn. This was a facility. The walls were lined with monitoring equipment. Digital displays glowing soft blue in the darkness. Screens showed graphs, temperature readouts, oxygen levels. A workbench ran the length of one wall, covered in testing equipment that looked like it belonged in a university laboratory, not a Texas ranch. And in the center of the space, set into the floor like some kind of industrial swimming pool, were tanks. Massive rectangular tanks. Each one maybe 20 feet long and 10 feet wide, their surfaces covered with heavy mesh screens. The water inside them was perfectly clear, almost unnaturally clear. I found the main light switch. Industrial LED panels flickered to life overhead, flooding the space with cold white light that made everything look even more surreal. That's when I saw them. At first, my brain couldn't process what I was looking at. The shapes moving in the tanks were too large, too prehistoric, too impossible for a barn in West Texas. Fish, but not fish. Leviathans. Sturgeon. Beluga sturgeon. If my half-remembered high school biology served me right, each one had to be 6, 7 feet long. Maybe more. They moved through the water with the slow, deliberate grace of blimps navigating through liquid air. Ancient and alien, and absolutely beautiful in a way that made my chest tight. I walked to the edge of the nearest tank and stared down at them. One swam close to the surface, its armored body catching the light. Its whisker-like barbels dragged along the bottom, searching. Its eyes, small and knowing, seemed to look right through me. These things had survived dinosaurs, had outlived empires, had seen ice ages come and go, and my father had been raising them in a barn in Texas. I started laughing. Couldn't help it. The sound echoed off the concrete walls, bouncing back at me like I'd lost my mind. Maybe I had. Clay thought I'd inherited dirt and cattle. He'd offered me $25,000 for one of the most valuable aquaculture operations I'd ever heard of. Beluga sturgeon, the source of the most expensive caviar in the world. The kind of stuff that sells for thousands of dollars per pound in places where people wear tuxedos to dinner. My father, the taciturn Texas rancher who thought my history degree was a waste of time, had built an underwater empire. I moved through the facility in a daze. Taking it all in, there were 6 tanks total, each at a different stage. Smaller fish in the first tanks, juveniles. The later tanks held the adults, massive and patient. Next to each tank was a clipboard with daily logs, water temperature, pH levels, feeding schedules, growth measurements, all in Dad's careful handwriting, dated right up until 3 days before he died. He'd been monitoring them until the very end. On the workbench, I found what I'd been hoping for, a laptop, dead, but when I plugged it in, it hummed to life with a password screen. I tried a few obvious combinations. Nothing worked. Then I noticed a sticky note tucked under the keyboard. Just numbers. Mom's birthday. The computer unlocked. The desktop was organized with a kind of obsessive precision that made me smile despite everything. Folders labeled by year, by tank, by procedure. Spreadsheets tracking growth rates, mortality rates, feed conversion ratios. This wasn't a hobby. This was research. This was science. I opened a folder labeled business and found contracts, purchase orders for equipment, correspondence with suppliers, and client lists. High-end restaurants in New York, Los Angeles, Dubai. Specialty importers in Japan and Russia. People who paid premium prices for sustainable American-raised caviar. There was a business account. I clicked on the banking tab and stared at the balance. $473,000. I sat down hard on the stool. My hand shook as I refreshed the page. Certain I'd misread. Same number. Nearly $500,000 in an operating account I didn't even know existed. The tax bill. That $50,000 nightmare that had been crushing my chest since I found it. It was pocket change. Less than pocket change. Dad had left me solvent. He'd left me successful. He'd left me a legacy that made Clay's inheritance look ordinary. But he hadn't left me instructions. He'd left me something harder. Something that required me to understand, to learn, to prove I was worthy of it. I found the notebooks next. Stacks of them, organized chronologically, going back 15 years. I pulled out the earliest one and started reading by the glow of the computer screen. Day 1. Received first batch of fingerlings from supplier in California. 500 specimens. Survival rate unknown. This is either the smartest thing I've ever done or the stupidest. Rachel would have known which. I don't. Rachel. Mom's name. The entries continued. Failures documented with brutal honesty. Lost 200 to temperature shock in first week. Should have acclimated them slower. Adjusting protocol. More losses. More adjustments. Year 1 was a disaster. Year 2 was slightly less of a disaster. But Dad didn't quit. He read scientific papers. Consulted with aquaculture experts. Traveled to farms in California and Idaho to see their operations. Slowly, methodically, he figured it out. By year 5, he had his first successful harvest. Modest, barely enough to cover costs, but it was proof of concept. By year 10, he was turning a profit. I kept reading, watching my father's journey unfold in his cramped handwriting. This wasn't just business documentation. This was a diary. Observations about the fish. Yes, but also thoughts, fears, hopes. Jake called today. Mentioned he's teaching a unit on westward expansion. Tried to tell him about the sturgeon. How they're survivors like the pioneers he teaches about. Couldn't find the words. Ended up talking about the weather. I'm no good at this. My eyes burned. More entries. More glimpses into a mind I'd never really known. Clay visited. Wanted to talk about selling the ranch. Told him the cattle operation was breaking even. Didn't mention the real business. He wanted to optimize it. Scale it up. Turn it into something corporate. That's not what this is. This is patience. This is understanding that some things can't be rushed. He wouldn't get it. But you would. The unspoken words seemed to say, you would understand. I flipped to the last notebook. The entries were more recent. The handwriting shakier. Dad had been sick those last few months, though he'd never told either of us how bad it was. And then, tucked into the back of the final notebook, I found it, an envelope with my name on it. My hands trembled as I opened it. Inside was a letter, handwritten on lined paper, the kind from a composition notebook. The handwriting was rough, shaky in places, but unmistakably his. Son, I'm not good with words. Never have been. Your mother, she could talk to you about feelings and dreams and all that. Me, I just knew how to work. When you left for New York, I was angry, but that's not the whole truth. I was scared. You were choosing a life I didn't understand. Books and ideas and teaching kids about dead people. It seemed impractical. Seemed like a waste of your brain. But I was wrong. The letter continued, and I read through tears I didn't bother wiping away. This operation, It's not like Clay's construction business. You can't force it. You can't bully it into being profitable. It requires patience, observation, the ability to see patterns that aren't obvious. The kind of mind that studies things carefully before acting. That's you, Jake. That's what you do. You look at history and find the stories everyone else missed. You see the details. These fish, they're like history. They've been around for 200 million years. They survived everything. But they need someone who understands that survival isn't about being the biggest or the loudest. It's about being smart enough to adapt. I had to stop reading, put the letter down, breathe. The barn was silent except for the hum of the filtration systems and the gentle movement of water. One of the big sturgeons surfaced briefly, its prehistoric snout breaking the water, then sank back down into the depths. I picked up the letter again. Clay's a good man, but he thinks in quarters and profit margins. He'd want to harvest everything immediately, maximize short-term returns, probably sell the whole operation to some corporation within a year. But you understand that some things are worth preserving, worth protecting, worth doing right even when doing it fast would be easier. I'm sorry I didn't tell you I was proud of you. I'm sorry I didn't understand that teaching matters. I'm sorry for a lot of things. But I'm not sorry for leaving you this. It's yours because only you can do it justice. Don't let my work die, son. Don't let Clay's short-term thinking destroy something I built for the long term. And maybe if you have time, teach some of your students about sturgeon, about survival, about patience. Dad, I sat there in that barn, surrounded by millions of years of evolutionary persistence, holding a letter from a man who'd never been able to say these things out loud. The weight I'd been carrying for 20 years, that certainty that I'd disappointed him, that I'd chosen wrong, that I'd failed to be the son he wanted, it cracked, split, fell away like old armor I didn't need anymore. He'd been proud of me. He'd understood. He just hadn't known how to say it. I don't know how long I sat there. Long enough for the sun to start rising outside. Long enough for my tears to dry. Long enough for something fundamental to shift in my chest. I stood up, checked the tanks systematically. Water levels good. Temperature holding steady. The automatic feeders Dad had installed were still working, dispensing food on schedule. The fish were fine. They'd been fine this whole time, waiting for someone to understand what they represented. I pulled out my phone, found the tax assessor's website, logged into the business account Dad had set up, paid the $50,000 property tax bill in full. Balance remaining for $123,000. Then I called my principal in New York, told him I needed an extended leave of absence. Family emergency. Estate matters. He wasn't happy, but he understood. I had work to do here. Real work. The kind that mattered. I walked back to the house as the sun painted the sky in shades of orange and gold. The ranch looked different in daylight. Not dead. Sleeping. Waiting for someone to wake it up properly. My phone rang. Clay, right on schedule. I let it go to voicemail, then listened to the message. Hey, just checking in. Listen, I know this is hard, but we really need to make a decision soon. That tax bill isn't going to wait forever. Call me back. I smiled, looked out at the pond where sunlight danced on the water surface. Somewhere below that surface, sturgeon that had outlived dinosaurs were going about their ancient business, unconcerned with human drama. I called Clay back. He answered on the first ring. Jake, finally. Listen, I've been thinking. Actually, Clay, I've been thinking too. Why don't you come out to the ranch tomorrow? Bring your lawyer. I've got a counteroffer I want to discuss. A pause. A counteroffer? Yeah. Business proposal. You want to see it in person. I could practically hear him smiling through the phone. That's great, Jake. I'm glad you're being smart about this. What time? 10 a.m. works? Perfect. I'll see you then. I hung up and stood on the porch, coffee cup in hand, watching the land wake up. Somewhere in the house behind me was Dad's old work shirt, the one he wore every day. I'd try it on later. I had a feeling it would fit. The next morning, I was ready. I'd spent the night going through every notebook, every contract, every document Dad had left. I understood the operation now. More than that, I understood what Dad had built and why. This wasn't just about money. It was about creating something that lasted, something that required intelligence over brute force. Clay's Cadillac appeared right on time, throwing up a plume of dust as it barreled down the dirt road. He parked and stepped out, all confidence and expensive cologne. His lawyer, a thin man with a briefcase, climbed out the passenger side. I was sitting on the porch, wearing Dad's work shirt. It did fit perfectly. Clay smiled as he approached. "Jake, good to see you looking settled. Coffee?" "Sure. Black." I poured him a cup from the pot I'd made fresh. He took a sip, looked around at the ranch, at the barn visible in the distance. "So, this counteroffer. I'm intrigued. Ready to talk numbers?" I smiled. "Actually, Clay, I'm withdrawing from negotiations entirely." His face shifted. Confusion, then something harder. "What?" "The property's not for sale. Not to you. Not to anyone." "Jake, be reasonable. You can't afford the taxes on this place. We both know that. Actually, I can. Paid them yesterday. In full." The silence that followed was beautiful. "How?" His voice had gone flat. That's when the rumble started. Deep and mechanical, growing louder. Clay turned to look down the road. A refrigerated truck was rolling toward us, white and massive, with lettering on the side. The Patriarch's Reserve. Premium sustainable caviar. Clay's face went through several expressions in quick succession. Confusion. Shock. Something that might have been anger or might have been fear. "What the hell is that?" "That, Clay, is the movable property you valued at basically nothing. Turns out Dad left me a functioning business. Profitable one, too. The truck parked near the barn. Workers climbed out, professionals who clearly knew the drill. They started unloading specialized containers, moving with the efficiency of people who'd done this before. I spent last night going through Dad's notebooks. Fascinating reading. 15 years of research and development. Turns out raising beluga sturgeon is incredibly technical. Requires patience, careful observation, analytical thinking. Not really your skill set. Clay's jaw worked. He looked at me at the truck, back at me. This is impossible. Dad was running a cattle operation. A failing cattle operation. The cattle were cover. Dad knew you want to optimize anything that looked profitable. Turn it corporate. He didn't want that. He wanted someone who understood that some things can't be rushed. So he left it to you. His voice was bitter. He left it to the son, who could handle it. I pulled out a folder I prepared. "By the way, I found something interesting in Dad's financial records. Looks like he was supporting your construction business for the last 5 years. Personal loans totaling about $300,000. No repayment schedule. No interest. Just helping out a successful son who apparently needed it." Clay's face went pale. "Since I'm now the executor of Dad's personal estate, I'll need to discuss those loans with my lawyer. Make sure everything's properly documented for tax purposes. Unless you'd like to contest the will, that would require opening all of Dad's financial records to court scrutiny." The threat hung in the air between us. Clay's lawyer touched his arm, whispered something. Clay shook him off. "You're making a mistake, Jake. You don't know anything about running a business. You're right. I know about research, about patience, about understanding complex systems, about preserving things that matter. Turns out that's exactly what this business needs." Clay stared at me for a long moment. Then he turned and walked back to his Cadillac without another word. His lawyer scrambled to follow. The engine roared to life, and they were gone, leaving another plume of dust in their wake. I watched them go, feeling nothing but calm. The workers finished loading. The foreman, a weather guy named Miguel, who'd apparently worked with Dad for years, came over. 1,500 pounds is harvest, he said. Best quality we've seen. Your father will be proud. Thanks, Miguel. Same schedule next month? Yes, sir. Sir, that was new. I spent the rest of the day learning. Miguel walked me through the entire operation, explaining what Dad had built, the water filtration system that kept the tanks pristine, the feeding schedule that maximized growth without compromising quality, the careful monitoring that ensured optimal conditions. It was complex, technical, fascinating. It was exactly the kind of intellectual challenge I'd been missing teaching the same lessons year after year. That evening, I sat on the porch watching the sun set over the pond, thinking about Sarah. My ex-wife used to say I turned everything into an intellectual project, like it was a character flaw, the way I'd analyze restaurant menus like historical documents, how I'd research the optimal method for anything before just doing it. She'd meant it as criticism during the divorce proceedings, evidence of my inability to just live in the moment. But sitting there, watching ancient fish swim in carefully balanced water, managing a business that required patience and analysis, and the ability to see patterns others missed, I realized something. For the first time in my life, being exactly who I was wasn't flaw. It was the whole point. The weeks that followed blurred together. I hired a property manager to handle the day-to-day operations, brought in a consultant from UC Davis to optimize the water systems, started researching market expansion, sustainable practices, conservation partnerships. And then I had an idea. I called Texas A&M University's aquaculture department, pitched them on a research partnership, the ranch as a living laboratory. Students could study sustainable sturgeon farming. We contribute to conservation efforts for endangered species. They loved it. 6 months later, I was standing by the pond with a graduate student named Maria. She was explaining her thesis on sturgeon genetics while I nodded and tried to keep up. Behind us, another harvest was underway. Smooth, professional, profitable. The ranch had become something neither Dad nor I could have predicted. A business, yes, but also a research facility, an educational resource, a conservation project. I'd stopped teaching high school. Didn't need to. The business more than covered my living expenses. But I was teaching in a different way now, hosting student groups, giving talks about sustainable aquaculture, about patience, about the value of understanding systems rather than exploiting them. Maria finished her explanation about genetic diversity and looked at me expectantly. Sorry, I said, lost in thought. Can you explain that pH relationship again? She smiled and pulled out her tablet, showing me graphs that would have looked completely alien to me a year ago. Now I understood them. Not perfectly, but enough. The fish moved through the water below us, ancient and patient, survivors of countless extinctions. They'd outlasted everything that tried to kill them by being adaptable, by not rushing, by doing things right instead of fast. I thought about Dad, about the years he'd spent figuring this out, about the legacy he'd built in silence because he didn't know how to talk about it, about the son he believed in even when he couldn't say it out loud. I thought about Clay, who'd seen dollars where Dad had seen value, who'd wanted quick returns where Dad had planted something that would last. And I thought about myself, the kid who'd run away from this place because he felt like a disappointment, the teacher who'd spent 20 years explaining other people's history while avoiding his own. I wasn't that person anymore. I was my father's son. Finally, completely, not because I was ranching the way he had, or because I'd chosen his life over mine, but because I found the thing he'd left specifically for me, the thing that required my particular skills, my specific way of seeing the world. The sturgeon surfaced briefly, breaking the water with that prehistoric snout, then disappeared back into the depths. Maria was still explaining genetics. I listened now, really listened, understanding that this was my life now, researching conservation, and building something that would outlast me. That night, I sat at Dad's desk, now my desk, and opened the final notebook. I'd read it a dozen times, but I kept coming back to the last entry. Clay sees dollars, not value. It has to be you, Jake. You see deeper. I picked up a pen, started a new notebook, wrote the date at the top of the first page. Day one, the next chapter, I wrote, finally understand what Dad built here. Not just about the fish, about patience, about seeing systems others miss, about building something that outlasts you. Tomorrow, conservation group meeting, 9 a.m. Finalize A&M research proposal. Check tank 3 filtration. Call McGillrey. New feeding protocol. The words looked right. They felt right. Not promises. Just work. Outside, the Texas night was vast and full of stars. Somewhere in the barn, Ancient fish swam through carefully maintained water, surviving like they'd always survived, patient and persistent and utterly themselves. I closed the notebook. Tomorrow I'd meet with a conservation group about expanding the breeding program. Next week, a film crew from a nature documentary wanted to do a feature. There were grants to apply for, research to coordinate, students to mentor. There was work to do. Real work. The kind that mattered. I smiled. For the first time in 20 years, I was exactly where I was supposed to be,